Hello everybody and welcome to Warfiles, the channel where we showcase, analyze and evaluate units and characters from movies, comics, games and more, and see how effective they would be on the battlefield. Since this is my very first video, I'm going to make a short intro to explain how this series works, so if you want to jump straight to the video, feel free to skip it. During these past few years, I made a list of all the source material for this channel, so I'll follow the list, but I will be happy to take requests and suggestions on whatever game you want me to bring to the channel. To rate these units, I'm going to use three main criteria. The first one is physiology, all the biological assets that describe the creature. What is it foremost? A human? A vampire? A god? How big it is? How fast does he run? How hard does he hit? Does it have other biological and evolutionary advantages? The second one is equipment, which is pretty self-explanatory. What is the character wearing? What's it made of? Does he have a weapon? Any mounts? Other gadgets? The third one, which is obvious as well, is training. Did the character train? With whom and in what? What advantage do they have with this knowledge? For the unit, I will also give a little background just to introduce it and put it into perspective. Getting to the point now today is where we take a look at the units in Stronghold 2. I decided to bring this game because it was one of my first PC games, so you have some sort of emotional attachment to it. I know it's not really appreciated and it's definitely not trending, but being this my first video, it kinda felt like the right thing to do. Stronghold 2 is a strategy game in which you build a castle and go to war with neighbors pretty much. If you're familiar with the genre, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's never explicitly stated, but is heavily based off 13th century England, so that's what we will use for background reference. Today we're going to talk about what I call the standard units, the ones you can recruit in the barracks. We'll deal with mercenaries in the next video. Since they're all humans, the physiology will be identical for all of them, and we'll discuss it just once. The modern man is about 177 centimeters tall and weighs about 83 kilograms. Since poor diet has an impact on growth and wealth, the numbers shrink down a bit, and these are the actual average height and weight of 13th century Englishmen. A human max speed, with no armor of course, is 45 kilometers per hour. It can be maintained only for 6 seconds and only by athletes however. The jogging speed then of soldiers would be around 10 km per hour. This is how many newtons a human can punch, and how many pounds per square inch he can bite. For comparison, that's the force needed to break a femur and a skull. If you're still with me, now we can finally start. The first and cheapest unit is the armored peasant, which is exactly what you expect. A common farmer wearing simple clothes, probably wool or cotton, with no protective use whatsoever and a coif on the head to shield him from the sun while he works in the fields. His only weapon is a pitchfork, although it's not technically a weapon but a tool. In its defense, this doesn't really represent a standard pitchfork, and it's a good thing. It's definitely longer, giving it more reach, and its prongs are not curved, but straight, which makes thrusting in and out easier. Even with these improvements, though, it's still not a weapon worthy of the name. It's less pointed than a spear and less durable as well. It's meant for hay, not for flesh after all. The three prongs allow our peasants to inflict more wounds with a single move, but they also split his strength into 3 directions instead of 1, making it harder to pierce any sort of armor. Pressure is equal to force, divided by surface after all. The training of the armored peasant is basically non-existent. These are soldiers rallied at the last moment just to have more men. They're pretty much cannon fodder. Historically speaking, peasants were recruited but were given at least levy training and decent equipment as well. No general would bring them on the battlefield otherwise. The pitchfork is more of a mob weapon, used in rebellions and strikes, and that's probably the style the developers were going for. Armored peasants have no fighting skills and they lack morale and discipline. They would just try to survive and probably rout at the first chance. Then we have the spearman, which looks exactly like the actual type of soldier a peasant would become. The only piece of armor he is wearing is a surveillance that protects his brain. For the rest, we have just plain clothes, just this time around they resemble a uniform at least. He's obviously armed with a spear, probably an ox tongue for the shape of the tip, about 2 meters long and made of steel. Spears are really effective thrusting weapons. They are pretty easy to use, have a long range, and can be used effectively in a formation. They also have a handy advantage against cavalry over other types of infantrymen, since they can reach the rider. Training-wise, spearmen are just peasants with the minimum training. They are levies and probably trained to patrol the streets and guard gates, but not as professional soldiers. They would be of some use on the field, but they still lack the morale of proper warriors. If the peasants are the first unit to run, the spearmen would be the second one. Next up, we have the archer, fast-moving unit, wearing just plain clothes and this Robin Hood-esque attire. I had a hard time classifying this bow, but since it's too long to be a short bow and it's definitely not a curved one, I'm gonna assume it's a longbow, even if the English longbowman looked completely different from this guy. The longbow, being almost as tall as the user, allows a fairly long draw and accomplishes amazing feats in distance and speed. It requires an enormous amount of force to be drawn, and this resulted in hypertrophic and malformed arms. He carries arrows with iron tips, probably. In the game he has infinite ammos, but in real life he would carry around 60 of them. The quiver is behind his back, which is an uncomfortable and historically inaccurate position. Arrows are hard to catch, are susceptible to movements such as crouching, and you can never tell how many you have left. To round up his equipment, he has a dagger, resembling a baselard for close quarters, useful against other light troops, but ineffective against regular infantry. His training aspect, a longbowman exercised for years, and on the battlefield was able to shoot 12 to 20 arrows a minute. That made him one of the most efficient ranged units of the time. As any other ranged unit, though, the archer is easy to rout if engaged in close combat. Cavalry charges are especially deadly for him. The second and last ranged unit is the crossbowman. To recruit him, you need leather armor, which is his main protective gear. Made of boiled and dried layers of cowhide, it protects against cuts and arrows. It wasn't actually really used in history, it's mostly a fantasy invention, kinda like the back quiver, but that's what he's wearing. To cover his head, he has what seems to be either a Mauryan helmet or a Spanish kettle hat, a really solid piece of gear in both cases. He carries a dagger, just like the archer, and his primary weapon is obviously the crossbow. Much slower to reload compared to the bow, the crossbow is much more powerful. So powerful, you can draw it by hand, you need a specific loader for it. Bolts can travel up to 300 feet per second, and as far as 70 yards when shooting point blank, 350 yards at 45 degrees. If arrows can pierce metal armor, crossbow bolts surely can. Training aspect, crossbows required much less training than longbows. They were actually pretty easy to use, to the point that many European states recruited for militias. Even if tankier than the archery melee, the crossbowman is still a ranged unit, and it should be kept out of combat at all times. He can hold his own for a little bit, but every actual infantry will rout it or demolish it. The first addition melee troop is the maceman, which fills the role of an assault unit. Macemen are equipped with the same leather armor that crossbowmen have, in compromise, speed, and protection. They also defend themselves with a round shield called a parma, made of wood with a steel handle. Useful against swords and arrows, much against axes and crossbows. His offensive gear is the spiked mace. With a wooden handle and a steel head, mace is a formidable weapon against armored and unarmored foes. Its blows are struck in a vertical movement, given in the momentum of gravity as well, as opposed to thrusts from swords and spears. The spikes also focus the input force in a smaller area, allowing more chances to penetrate armor. For some weird reason, they roll bold as hell as well. Since this is a pretty much an invented unit, we can't really discuss about its training. A mid-tier unit, so I guess it has decent morale and discipline, but can be routed if overwhelmed. Finally, moving to the high-tier units, we have the pikeman, although the name can be confusing because he doesn't have a pike, but a poleaxe. A poleaxe is a type of halberd, and a halberd is the unit of a spear with an axe. It has the length and range of a spear, and its bonus against cavalry, but it also has the crushing power of the axe. Because of this versatility, halberds were a really popular choice, and they remained one for many centuries. The pikeman also wears a steel armor and a kettle hat, probably around for the guilds away. This is an expensive troop to field, so you can count on it in the midst of battle. Well equipped and well disciplined, the pikeman must have trained long and well, as it plays the primary defensive and guarding role of the game. The swordsman is the highest tier of infantry you can have, slow but incredibly tough and strong. He is wearing a full-plate steel armor and a great helm. He has protection on his limbs as well, as opposed to the pikeman, and that makes him probably the tankiest unit, almost invulnerable to arrows. He also carries a hidden shield if the armor wasn't enough already, and he carries his signature weapon, the knightly sword, double-edged and made of steel. Is the most classic of swords. This unit is really expensive and should be feared on the battlefield. The swordsman is hard to bring down, and I guess even more hard to rout. His impenetrable turtle shell makes him a powerhouse, able to withstand a huge amount of damage in a long time span before succumbing. This is an expert soldier who fights for a living and has collected experience in many battles. The very best unit, and the last one for today, is the knight. On the higher end of the medieval hierarchy, the knight is a noble, which makes all the difference. He never experienced hunger and was always well fed and healthy. His equipment is the best available and his training long and precise. The knight was born to be one, and has trained since early childhood for it. In a similar way to the swordsman, he wears a full-plate steel armor, which what looks like a basnet. He carries the same sword and shield of his less powerful counterpart, but of probably higher quality. Even if he can be fielded on foot, the knight reaches his full potential when mounted on his warhorse. The trusty steed is almost surely a stallion, a male that has not been castrated. This makes him more wild, and it is what medieval scribes called a destrier, an animal bred purposely for warfare, big, bulky, and mean. The closest horse to the old descriptions for the British geographic area is the Percheron Shire, about 178 centimeters to the shoulder and weighing in at 550 kilos. It has been used in the last 2 centuries as a cart horse because of its strength, but for the same reason it was used as a war mount 800 years ago. The horse is equipped with a chevron and a crinier to protect the head and neck, and a caparison which gives the animal some sort of defense against arrows. The training of the knight is what separates him from the rest. At the age of 7, he was sent away from home and he trained as a page until 14. He trained to fight with sword, two-handed sword, battle axe, mace, dagger, and lance. He would also train in other physical activities such as climbing, swimming, throwing stones, javelins, archery, and wrestling. Extensive care was given to the equestrian skills, in which the page exercised daily and kept doing so even after becoming a squire, from 14 to 21. A squire was considered fit for battle, and would accompany his lord on the field and sometimes take part in the battle. After he proved his valor and was considered worthy of the honor both technically and morally, only then he would finally be knighted. This is all for today's video. Thank you for watching it. Leave a like, comment and subscribe, and see you in the next video.